Hello, I'm Eric Hanscom. Welcome to the Drone Zone. The FAA just put out some proposed rules. Now, these aren't laws yet, but they are proposed rules that would govern small drones or UASs or whatever else you want to call them. I thought I'd put together a really quick video where I just went over some of the rules as they are proposed and give you some of my thoughts on the matter. The first thing about these proposed rules is if you actually read through the document, you'll find that there are a number of places where the FAA has acknowledged the benefit that drones bring. And I think that, as with any document, reading the rationale behind the rules is fairly important. You can basically summarize the rules or the proposed rules on about a page of paper. But if you read through the entire 100-plus page document, you'll see exactly why the FAA came to the conclusions that it did. And I think that a lot of the rationales proposed by the FAA are very promising for those of us in the drone community. Let me explain. So let me begin by pointing out a couple of places where in the entire proposed rules the FAA goes out of its way to point out the benefits. Now, I'm just going to read this because I obviously haven't memorized it. On page 15 and 16, in time, the FAA anticipates that the proposed rule would provide an opportunity to substitute small UAS operations for some higher risk manned flights, such as inspecting towers, bridges, or other structures. The use of small unmanned aircraft would avert potential fatalities and injuries to those in the aircraft and on the ground. It would also lead to more efficient methods of performing certain commercial tasks that are currently performed by other methods. The FAA has not quantified the benefits of this proposed rulemaking because we lack sufficient data. The FAA invites commenters to provide data that could be used to quantify the benefits of this proposed rule. So, what FAA appears to be saying is that these rules will allow certain limited commercial applications, but FAA remains open to other considerably more potentially dangerous applications, so long as the technology advances to the point where these applications become safe. On page 35, the FAA points out that under these new proposed rules, the vast majority of the commercial uses for which exemptions have already been granted will actually be covered by the rules. You won't need exemptions anymore. So this is good news. And they say that the exemption process will continue for those uses that are outside the rules. Page 36 also has an interesting comment in which the FAA acknowledges that drone technology is evolving so rapidly that the uses that may be unsafe right now may become safe in the future, and that the FAA acknowledges the possibility that it may expand the rules to include these other uses. So, for example, delivery by drone and things like that, that may become a reality in the future as soon as some of the technologies such as avoiding collisions and return home may be perfected. The proposed rules go on to point out several uses of drones that previously were commercial and required an exemption to now be covered by these proposed rules and to be allowed. And I'm going to read the list here. Agriculture, research and development, education, academic, power line and pipeline inspection in hilly or mountainous terrain, bridge inspections, search and rescue, wildlife nesting area evaluations, and probably of most concern to a number of the people who will be watching this, aerial photography. So yes, you folks that are taking pictures of real estate and of course not charging for the actual real estate photography, but rather charging for the editing of it, now it appears that you have pretty much a free license to go out and shoot whatever you want to with your drone. Okay, let's start going over the rest of the rules as they're proposed here. First of all, you have to be 17 years old. Unfortunately, I guess that would prohibit my 8-year-old son from being a drone pilot, which is really too bad because by the age of 7, he was actually a much better drone pilot than a number of the people who put videos on YouTube, including the guy in Chile who flew his drone into the side of a truck. So anyway, I personally would like to see better judgment be more important than age, but it is what it is. So 17 years old is the minimum flying age, it appears. No flying at night. It doesn't really affect me that much, and I haven't been really impressed with a whole lot of the night views that you get from drones, but I know that some people will be a little bit bummed out about it. But again, remember that FAA has to balance the safety of the people and the safety of people's property against the rights of the drone users. So this is one thing that, at this point anyway, is going to be illegal under the proposed rules. FAA also makes note that you cannot fly a drone directly over people, directly over people not directly involved in the operation. Now, the concern here that they discuss a little more further on page 81 is that if there's flyaways or a drone mishap, if you're not over people, hopefully the drone won't fall on the people. Now, the problem that I see with this rule is, first of all, if you're flying in any kind of a public place, you're going to fly over people. There's no way to avoid it. The second thing, and I'd welcome some news stations to weigh in, is that newspapers and magazines, they would like, I'm sure, to use drones to cover major events where there are a lot of people around. They can't, obviously, if there's, say, a protest march going on in downtown San Diego, they can't very well walk along the aisle of each row of people who are participating in the march and ask them if they mind being filmed by a drone. So by its definition, prohibiting you from using a drone unless everyone underneath you is directly involved in the operation is really going to put a hamper on the news media's ability to film events. And I wonder here, I was actually just at a news event hosted by the San Diego Union Tribune, and reporters have quite a few First Amendment rights that relate to their ability to gather news. Also, as a photographer, why should it be any different whether you're up in a drone 100 feet over a crowd or you have a handheld camera and you're standing in the crowd? You still have a right to take pictures of newsworthy events, don't you? So anyway, this is something that I'm sure is going to be worked out later on. Can't fly a drone if it weighs more than 55 pounds under these proposed rules without an exemption. So why 55 pounds? I have no idea. I've got about, I think I have 5 or 6 drones, depending on whether you count ones that don't work very well anymore. And I don't think any of them weigh more than 3 pounds. So to me, it doesn't really matter whether I can fly a drone that is 3 pounds or 13 pounds. I'm probably never going to go over 5 pounds. So why 55 pounds? I don't know. But anyway, that's the number that they picked. FAA also considered 5 different weight classes, but they threw out that idea as being a little too cumbersome and difficult. What they are considering, though, is something called a micro UAS category, which would be limited to drones under 4 pounds, which would include most of the commercially flown recreational drones today. And they're considering bringing in micro UAS rules similar to those in force in Canada right now. Now, there are some interesting aspects of the Canadian rules, one of which is that if you're going to fly commercially, you need at least $10,000 in liability insurance. So obviously the drone insurance industry is sort of in its fledgling stage here in the United States. I know, just for humor, I called one of them up and asked them how much it would cost to insure my $1,300 Phantom 2 Vision Plus, and they said it would be $1,200. So let's see, I paid $1,200, and if I crash my Phantom, I save $100 on a replacement. Probably not what I really want to do. Anyway, obviously if FAA brings in the Canadian requirement of insurance, this is going to be quite a boon for the U.S. insurance industry. The speed limit under these proposed rules will be 100 miles per hour. And again, where did they get 100 miles per hour? I don't know. That's certainly going to be irrelevant to me. I don't think any of my drones go more than about 25 or 30 miles an hour at the absolute most. I do have some friends, though, who build racing drones, and for them, this may become relevant. I've seen some of their FPV flying videos, and these babies can really hum. But anyway, for those of us who fly the Parrots and the Phantoms, I don't think 100 miles an hour is really going to be relevant to us. The new ceiling is going to be 500 feet as opposed to 400 feet as it was before. So to me, that's not much of a difference. When you've got that fisheye lens going on your Phantom or your Parrot, you get up much above 200 feet. It's kind of hard to see the details anyway. So not terribly relevant, but the FAA suggested this in their rules because the lower ceiling for aircraft is 500 feet. Personally, I kind of like the idea of a 100-foot buffer zone. between the top of the UAS and the bottom of the airplanes, but anyway, they set it at 500 feet. Line of sight. This is where there's a lot of controversy right now over what the proposed rules really say. A lot of people are saying that because they limit it to contact lenses and corrective glasses, that what the FAA is really saying is you need the operator, the person flying the drone, to actually have a line of sight on the drone at all times, or have the capability of having it. And the example that they give in one part of the proposed rules is the FAA operator may from time to time take his or her eyes off the drone and look down at the screen, or look down at the knobs or the buttons. Okay, so that makes sense. Now, a lot of people have jumped on that to say that that prevents the use of first-person view goggles like Fat Shark and things like that. And a lot of people are all up in arms because they enjoy flying FPV and they think that this bans it. So when I read through this, I found a couple of sections that are sort of interesting and it almost appear to be contradictory. So I'm going to read these because I can't really do justice to what they're saying without stating each word. On page 67 and 68, the FAA states, the FAA considered proposing that a UAS operator be permitted to exercise his or her see and avoid responsibilities through technological means, such as onboard cameras. Anything more than brief moments during which the person maintaining visual line of sight is unable to see the small unmanned aircraft would be prohibited under this proposed rule. So that tells me that the only way that somebody with FPV goggles could try to get away with it is to take the goggles, bring them up, look at the UAS, bring them down again, get FPV. Okay, then we go on to another section. Visual observer. Under the proposed rule, an operator would not be required to work with a visual observer, but a visual observer could be used to assist the operator with the proposed visual line of sight and see and avoid requirements by maintaining constant visual contact with the small unmanned aircraft in place of the operator, while an operator would always be required to have the capability of visual line of sight of the small unmanned aircraft. This proposed rule would not require the operator to exercise this capability if he or she is augmented by at least one visual observer. So when I read this, if I'm an FPV flyer, I'm going to bring along an observer, put on my Fat Sharks, and say I have the capability of line of sight because I can just remove my goggles at any time and see the UAV. And my observer over there, they are keeping line of sight at all times. So this seems to offer sort of an exception, or a way, a crack in the armor to get through this apparent prohibition against FPV flying. Now on page 69 we have an entirely, it appears to me, different statement. And I'm going to read it to you. However, the FAA recognizes that there are advantages to using vision-enhancing devices, such as those used when utilizing camera video transmitted to a screen at the operator's station, also known as first-person view, when conducting inspections of towers or bridges. Okay? This proposed rule is not intended to prohibit the use of these devices. Rather, the proposed visual line of sight requirement requires simply that at least one person involved in the operation, either the operator or a visual observer, must maintain an unenhanced visual line of sight of the small unmanned aircraft. Anyone else involved in the operation may use a vision-enhancing device, including first-person view, so long as that device is not used to meet the proposed requirements of Section 103.31 and 107.37. So, when I read this to mean that you can wear first-person view goggles if you're the operator, so long as your spotter is using line of sight. So this section would seem to allow the use of FPV goggles so long as your observer or spotter was using line of sight. However, notice that they appear to note that this is really useful when conducting inspections of bridges or towers. So is this only for when people are inspecting bridges or towers, or is this for everybody? We obviously need a little bit of clarification here. Speaking of FPV, the new rules would limit flying of drones to situations where you have at least 3 miles of visibility. Now, the the rules here appear to have their basis in the fact that FAA doesn't want you to be flying your drone when you can't see it. So if you have 3 miles of visibility and you have to keep it within your eyesight, obviously I can't see a drone much more than probably 400 yards away, much less 3 miles. So it follows the FAA's goal to keep the drones relatively contained to a small area so that if there is a problem, hopefully nobody gets hurt. Now there's also a comment here on pages 49 and 50 regarding FPV vision, and this appears to be relevant too. So basically what they're saying here is that peripheral vision is very important for a drone operator, and so anything that would take away your peripheral vision, such as FPV goggles, or for that matter sunglasses with the little glare reflecting screens on it, apparently those would not be allowed to be used when you're flying a drone. So again, with this FPV stuff, we're really getting some fairly mixed messages here, I think. So if you look on page 66, here's the quote: "Because at this time there is no technology that can provide an acceptable see and avoid replacement for human vision for small UAS operations, this proposed rule would limit small UAS operations to within the visual line of sight of the operator and a visual observer." So once again, the purpose of the rule is to make sure you keep your eye on your drone so that your drone doesn't disappear. Now obviously if there's a flyaway, there's not too much you can do about the drone staying within your visual line of sight. But anyway, these are just some more comments that appear to impact the FPV situation. So you're not going to be able to drive and drone, and you can't fly and drone. So you can't control a drone from an airplane or from a car. Okay, that's probably good. However, you're going to be able to boat and drone. So apparently you can drive a boat out to the middle of the ocean and then fly your drone around, take pictures of whales, things like that. So that's going to be the new rule on that. You are going to need to pass a couple of exams. You're going to have to be able to pass a knowledge test and get recertified every couple of years, and you're going to have to get vetted by the TSA. So I think these are all good things, because one of the biggest problems the drone community faces is the prevalence of dridiots. A dridiot is a drone flying idiot, and unfortunately we have quite a few of them around, and they like to post their videos on YouTube. And we actually at the Drone Zone, we have a contest every month for the Dridiot of the Month, and so so far we've had 2 months, and the winners were the drunken, or at least drinking heavily, government employee who borrowed a drone and flew it into a tree on the White House, and then the Chilean drone operator who flew it against traffic on a freeway and crashed it into a truck. So those are our 2 winners for the months of January and February so far. They're not going to require a medical exam for droners. And for a while it was looking like you were going to have to get certified as a private pilot to fly a drone. This would have been very, very expensive as well as time consuming, so I'm really glad that they didn't enforce this requirement. However, I'm hoping during the vetting process that they'll have some sort of some mental health questionnaires and hopefully take out the kind of people that like to fly drones opposite direction against traffic on a freeway. It'd be good to get those people out of the skies. There are also prohibitions against reckless droning, and if you are involved or your drone is involved in an accident that causes damage to a person or property, you're supposed to report it to the FAA within 10 days. There appear to be 6 commercial test sites that are going to be set up. It's going to cost around $300 to get certified. So anyway, once these go up, I'm sure there'll be a nice long line of people wanting to go through the certification process. I think the other thing that's worth noting here is that the FAA shows how it's feeling about the drones and the drone community in a couple of different sections here. So when we turn to page 34, the FAA describes how broader rules can be considered once the technology catches up. So for example, they suggest that we try first with low-risk uses of drones commercially, like pipeline inspections, and then gradually start heading into more high-risk areas such as package delivery and pizza delivery. So again, once the technology catches up, the FAA has stated that it's willing to consider expanding this rule. The bottom line, speaking as a patent attorney and a drone flyer, is that I think that these FAA rules are going to be very beneficial for the community. Again, if you're coming up with new inventions, why should you bother putting up a lot of time into R&D and development when, if you can't protect the idea, somebody else can just steal it, and if they're a bigger company, they can go into business against you because they didn't have to pay for the R&D. They can mass manufacture at a cheaper price than you can, and they can basically have a price war and drive you out of business. So unless you can protect these items with a patent, it seems as though the future of commercial drone technology is in other countries rather than the United States. So I see this as very, very positive because they specifically do allow for R&D and other previously commercial drone uses for which you would need to get an exemption. So again, I think this is a positive step in the right direction. So these proposed rules have only been out for a day, so who knows what they really mean and what the other interpretations are going to come down to. But there have been a couple of issues raised already, and the first one is privacy. Some people are critical of the fact that the FAA rules do not address privacy concerns. Well, there are plenty of privacy laws out there already, and obviously these will need to be reinterpreted slightly in light of the fact that we now have something other than handheld cameras with telephoto lenses to worry about invading people's privacy. However, I'm sure this is something that can be worked out over time, so I don't really necessarily see the need for the proposed rules to include any privacy concerns. Package delivery is another thing that was left out of the types of commercial uses that would be allowed under this proposed rule. I understand that Amazon.com and Domino's and a few of the other places that wanted to integrate a UAS delivery into their operations are not terribly happy about this, and I understand that. However, I think we need to keep in mind that FAA has left open the possibility that once the technology catches up, that they will consider expanding the types of commercial operations that will be allowed under this proposed rule. In particular, I know that the concerns are that drones right now don't have avoidance technologies such that if they detect that they're going to crash into something on a flight path, either a stationary object such as a tree or perhaps another drone or even a low-flying aircraft or helicopter, that they don't have the technology to avoid that. So once that technology is in place, perhaps FAA will expand the rule. The second issue is the fact that drones, once they do flyaways, they usually aren't very good about returning home. Obviously, we don't want an Amazon delivery of flowers to end up in the middle of the ocean or something like that. So the FAA appears to want the technologies to be improved to the point where if there's a software glitch or some other delivery problem, that the drone will automatically and consistently fly back to its point of origin. Page 39 of the proposed rules gives some direction on the FAA's desire to have a constrained area and how that might be able to protect people and property. And so obviously, if you let somebody fly a drone where it's out of the line of sight, there are additional concerns. I know personally, I've lost control over my drone once when I was flying it in Thailand and it went behind a tree. And my signal got cut off and it began flying home, fortunately, and I was able to get control over it again before it flew completely home, and I was able to fly with it some more. But these things do happen, and until the technologies are perfected, that's the way the law is going to be. Foreign flyers. Page 43 puts some interesting limitations on exactly who can be certified and who can bring a drone and use it for what purposes. So if you happen to be a non-citizen of the United States without residency, there are some hoops you're going to need to jump through. So you might want to check out this section as well. So anyway, I wanted to get this video out as soon as I could after the proposed rules. Obviously, we're going to have further interpretation of these rules by FAA in the near future, but I did want to get you out something as quickly as possible. I'm Eric Hanscom, and I'm droning on and on.